Tonight at 10, the new Conservative leader is Rishi Sunak. He'll be the youngest British Prime Minister of modern times. Minutes after being elected by Conservative MPs, he ruled out an early general election and warned his party had to unite or die.
We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together.
His last remaining challenger, Penny Mordaunt, had left the race a few minutes before the official announcement was made.
We have received one valid nomination. And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party.
Politics comes at us rather fast these days, doesn't it? This autumn's second new Prime Minister inherits a nightmarish soup of political and economic gloom. He moves in there tomorrow to try and sort it out.
Yes, we'll have more from Chris in Downing Street in this extended edition of BBC News at 10 as we consider the prospects for a Sunak premiership. At Westminster, the main opposition parties are united in their demand for a general election so that millions of voters can have their say.
Labour thinks that we should be having a general election. I think everybody who I've spoken to, the public, have said we should be having a general election. There is no mandate now.
He should call an early general election. He's the second person in a row to be appointed as Prime Minister by Tories, not elected by the population.
Mr Sunak's rapid advance is a significant moment for politics. He's the first British Asian to become Prime Minister. And we'll be asking voters who are deeply concerned about the rising cost of living for their thoughts on the change at number 10.
It's all a joke though, isn't it? I'm a single mum and we're all struggling financially. We just need to get their priorities in order.
And on BBC London, we get reaction to Rishi Sunak becoming our next Prime Minister and what it could mean for people and businesses here in the capital.
Good evening. The new leader of the Conservative Party is Rishi Sunak. And tomorrow morning, he'll be installed as Britain's youngest Prime Minister in over 2 centuries. Mr Sunak is the first British Asian to become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. His victory was confirmed earlier this afternoon when his last remaining challenger, Penny Mordaunt, dropped out of the race just a few minutes before the nominations closed. Mr Sunak will be replacing Liz Truss just 7 weeks after she defeated him in the previous contest. And he takes office at a time of deep economic trouble. Labour, the SNP, Lib Dems, other opposition parties, all demanding an immediate general election so that voters can have their say. Well, first, let's join our political editor, Chris Mason, in Downing Street.
Huw, as you say, it is 7 weeks ago today that Liz Truss was elected as Conservative leader, the day after she became Prime Minister. Today, Rishi Sunak was elected as Conservative leader. Tomorrow, he will become Prime Minister. Yes, as we've reflected in our conversations over the last couple of weeks, politics is on fast forward. It is only 4 days ago that Liz Truss resigned, and now more change beckons. Today's new Conservative leader, this week's new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak arrived at Conservative Party headquarters this afternoon, his party's third leader this year. Waves, smiles and handshakes done, he wanted to talk to the country, but didn't want to face questions from reporters.
I'd like to pay tribute to Liz Truss for her dedicated public service to the country. She has led with dignity and grace through a time of great change and under exceptionally difficult circumstances, both at home and abroad. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to. The United Kingdom is a great country, but there is no doubt we face a profound economic challenge. We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together. I pledge that I will serve you with integrity and humility, and I will work day in, day out to deliver for the British people.
All weekend and into this morning, this woman, Penny Mordaunt, wanted to stand as well. She had until 2 o'clock this afternoon to find 100 supporters in order to make sure the final decision was taken by Conservative Party members rather than being left to MPs. Just after 1, her team reckoned they were just a few supporters short of the magic number. But with minutes to go, one of her biggest backers was having second thoughts. So here we are at 1:30, half an hour to go. Penny Mordaunt's campaign grappling for every possible vote, and you've fled the ship.
Yeah, I think there's plenty. I mean, there's 100 others, and I totally understand the legitimacy of arguing that the party membership should have the say. It's a difficult call, but I just think in the circumstances where division in the Conservative Party costs money, it increases the price of money, it puts interest rates up, the statesmanlike thing to do, I think, is to get together today. And Rishi and Penny will work together, can work together. I just think, why not do it now rather than wait 3 days?
Half an hour later, an official announcement imminent and a statement from Penny Mordaunt. Our party is our membership, whether we are elected representatives, activists, fundraisers or supporters. We all have a stake in who our leader is. These are unprecedented times. Despite the compressed timetable for the leadership contest, it is clear that colleagues feel we need certainty today. They have taken this decision in good faith for the good of the country. Rishi has my full support. And she added, we all owe it to the country, to each other and to Rishi to unite and work together for the good of the nation. There is much work to be done. And a few minutes after that, confirmation of another new Prime Minister.
I can confirm that we have received one valid... Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party.
It's quite astonishing, isn't it, that the guy who was defeated by the current Prime Minister is replacing her a matter of weeks after she took office. The Conservatives' rivals say it's time for a general election.
They can't just keep doling out prime ministers every month because they're in total chaos and they've lost control of the market and haven't got any ideas of how they're going to tackle the cost of living that people are facing.
He's the second person in a row to be appointed as Prime Minister by Tories, not elected by the population. The idea that he can go 2 years before seeking or winning a democratic mandate, I think, is just unthinkable.
The challenges we face are so serious that we need the mandate that democracy is given by a general election. The Tory party have sidestepped that for today.
This building has seen much down the centuries, the generations, and rather a bit in just the last few weeks, posing some sharp questions for those who govern us. What do you say to our viewer who comes to the reasonable-minded conclusion that it's been a complete shambles?
Well, no one would want to see what we've seen over the last few months. It's been difficult, it's been painful. I've been dealing with my international counterparts with all the challenges going on around the globe. And of course, what they want is they want the UK government, they want Britain to once again be the rock of stability.
Because they've been laughing at us, haven't they? I mean, overseas we've become a laughingstock.
Well, look, what's going on? I mean, no one's going to defend what's gone on over the last few months. It's been painful, it's been brutal, but now it comes to an end.
Autumn's second new Prime Minister, the third to call this place home this year. The era of Rishi Sunak, for however long it lasts, beckons.
We'll talk to Chris again in just a moment, but let's underline one thing. Rishi Sunak is, as we saw, already Conservative leader. He's not yet Prime Minister. That happens in the morning. There'll be a final cabinet meeting chaired by the outgoing Prime Minister Liz Truss at approximately 9 a.m. And then following that, there will be a departing statement by Liz Truss outside number 10 at around 10:15. And then we have Mr Sunak formally taking over after an audience with the King at Buckingham Palace. After that, he will make his way over to Downing Street, and then on arrival at number 10, we think just after 11:30, there will be a statement by Mr Sunak there as he begins his term as Prime Minister. Let's go back to Chris in Downing Street and think about the immediate priorities, Chris, for Mr Sunak when he goes in through that door tomorrow lunchtime.
Yes, we're becoming rather familiar, aren't we, with the constitutional choreography of the handover of power from one Prime Minister to the next. The first moment for Rishi Sunak will be just a few yards behind me at the lectern, where we get a sense of him addressing the country and setting out his priorities as Prime Minister and the character that he will bring to government. Then it'll be behind the black door and the process of governing will be underway. And his first task will be shaping a new government. Now, he emphasises the need for stability for all of the obvious reasons, given what's happened in the last few weeks. But how does he illustrate that in those opening hours, whilst also putting something of his own stamp on the top table around his cabinet? For instance, if he was to pick a new Home Secretary, we'd have had 3 Home Secretaries in a week. To what extent is that stable? What about the crucial role of Chancellor? We've seen Jeremy Hunt in the last few days set out his vision for how the economy might be stabilised after the last few weeks, and how things might look at that crucial economic statement currently penciled in for next Monday. Does he stick with Jeremy Hunt, or does he shift to someone else? They are just 2 of the many, many posts he has to fill. Such a tricky balancing act for the new Prime Minister to get right.
Chris, we'll talk again later. Thanks very much. Chris Mason there in Downing Street. As Chris mentioned, one of the remarkable things about Mr Sunak is his rapid rise at Westminster. He's been a Member of Parliament for just 7 years. He was elected by the voters of Richmond in Yorkshire in 2015. And as I was saying, he's the youngest Prime Minister of modern times. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, has more on the Sunak story.
Addressing the nation during a pandemic, a month after becoming Chancellor.
You will not face this alone.
Rishi Sunak helped lead the government's economic response. The furlough scheme paid 80% of millions of people's salaries for months and cost billions.
Hello.
He also masterminded the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, encouraging diners back to restaurants when they reopened.
There we go. Brilliant.
You. I've worked with Rishi for some time, and I would say everyone knows that he's smart and competent, but he's also incredibly dedicated, really hard-working, and just a really kind person.
Big boots to fill, lad.
All of that came just 5 years after he was elected as the Conservative MP for Richmond in North Yorkshire. His parents, of Indian descent, came to the UK from East Africa. He's spoken about the sacrifices they made to send him to Winchester College, a top private school. He talked about the experience in a BBC documentary.
You know, I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, you know, working class, but I'm not working class, but I mix and match, and then I go to see kids from an inner city state school and tell them, you know, to apply to Oxford and talk to them about people like me.
After Oxford University, a career in banking and his marriage to the daughter of a billionaire made him extremely wealthy. Political opponents have commented on his expensive houses, clothes and shoes, suggesting he's out of touch with ordinary people. The revelation that his wife had non-dom tax status proved politically toxic. He said he'd informed senior civil servants when he joined government, but a U-turn followed.
She's always followed all the rules, but she recognises this goes beyond just following those rules, so she's decided to pay both UK and foreign taxes.
The episode was a low point for Rishi Sunak. He was visibly angry at what he saw as an intrusion into his wife's financial affairs. Colleagues, though, felt that it betrayed a certain political naivety, and some even predicted that his career would never recover.
Rishi Sunak is a long-standing Brexit supporter, but as Chancellor he rarely trumpeted the benefits of leaving the EU. He got caught up in the scandal about Downing Street parties, receiving a fine for breaking COVID laws. Friends say he just turned up early for a meeting in the cabinet room.
tackling the costs of transport.
There'd been rumours of tensions between him and Boris Johnson over spending. After a number of scandals, Mr Sunak resigned in protest. He was blamed by Mr Johnson's friends for bringing him down.
Please welcome Rishi Sunak.
When he stood to be Tory leader in the summer, he gave this warning about Liz Truss's tax cuts.
Liz, your plans, your own economic advisor has said that would lead to mortgage rates, interest rates going up to 7%. Can you imagine what that's going to do for everyone here and everyone watching? That's thousands of pounds on their mortgage bill.
Conservative members rejected his approach a few weeks ago. Today, colleagues have decided he's the man to bring stability. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
So the UK prepares for its third Prime Minister in a matter of weeks after a period of extreme political turmoil, and the new Conservative leader wasted no time today in warning his party that it faces destruction unless it pulls together. Much of the focus will be on those constituencies which switched from Labour to Conservative at the last election. So what are Rishi Sunak's prospects in those places? Here's Professor Sir John Curtis with his expert analysis.
Mr Sunak is somebody who voted Leave, who campaigned for Leave, and is very clearly in that camp, and to that extent at least might well be able to appeal to Red Wall voters. He is also somebody who is pretty conservative on the issue of immigration, which is undoubtedly a crucial issue for them. But what we have to realise is that even amongst Leave voters at the moment, the Conservatives are behind Labour in the polls, and for them the question of economic competence and whether or not they are going to be able to survive economically, personally, over this winter and over the next 2 years is in a sense now the dominant issue.
That's the view from Professor Sir John Curtis on the electoral challenges for the new Prime Minister. So what do voters make of his elevation to the top job? Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been in Wakefield in West Yorkshire, which elected a Conservative MP in 2019, but then switched back to Labour in a by-election earlier this year.
The political landscape has shifted once again, while voters, like those here in the cathedral city of Wakefield, could but watch. Dennis, who's backed the Conservatives before, runs a local sweet shop. He welcomes the party's latest choice of Prime Minister, but after recent economic turmoil, doesn't see easy solutions.
Quite a clever fella, actually, probably one of the cleverest guys. I'd probably give him a chance, see what he does in 18 months, but he's got an uphill task.
Not far away, this community centre is in a residential area with high levels of need. For Bernie, the manager, there is frustration at how events in Westminster have unfolded.
Whilst the Conservative Party have been navel-gazing and looking at their own self-interest, communities like this have been forgotten and not prioritised, and it's bordering on criminal. I'm not confident that the new Prime Minister will deliver. It doesn't feel very democratic right now.
In the city centre, some share a similar sentiment.
Rishi Sunak is going to be the new Prime Minister.
Yeah.
What do you think?
We need another general election. Needs a swing door on number 10.
It's all a joke though, isn't it? I'm a single mum and we're all struggling financially. We just need to get the priorities in order.
What do you make of what's been happening in Westminster?
I don't think it's been right good, if I've got to be honest. One thing after another, isn't it?
It just seems a farce, a joke. I mean, there's no real leadership.
This was one of the seats the Conservatives won from Labour at the 2019 election when Boris Johnson led the party. But they lost it in a by-election earlier this year. It shows how the party's electoral fortunes have shifted and lays bare the challenge facing Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister.
Conservative Party member Wahida says recent political chaos has had an impact on the doorstep. She's now hoping for some stability.
The people we're expecting to lead us are just leading a circus. It's become embarrassing and it's hard to defend this as local activists.
What do you think about Rishi Sunak?
I think he's great. All this bickering and this sniping, it's got to end because it's not a good look.
Back in the city centre, Tanya runs her own candle shop and says the uncertainty hasn't helped business, but she's prepared to give the incoming Prime Minister a chance.
If he can show his teeth and get the taxes sorted, I don't mind paying tax as long as it's going to help the economy and get us going.
Would you have faith that Rishi Sunak would be able to
do what you wanted, make things more stable?
I think after what's just happened with Liz Truss, hopefully, is it third time lucky?
The Conservatives might hope they've bought themselves a window to restore public faith. It could be narrow. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Wakefield.
Well, shortly after Mr Sunak's victory was announced, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, congratulated him and expressed the hope that they could have a constructive working relationship. But she also demanded an immediate general election and a rejection of any more austerity measures. In a moment, we'll also be hearing from Wales and Northern Ireland, Hywel Griffith in Cardiff and Chris Page in Stormont. First, we're going to start with our Scotland editor, James Cook, in Edinburgh.
Yes, Huw. Well, Rishi Sunak has previously made clear that he fully intends to oppose any future referendum on Scottish independence. And he's also suggested that there should be a greater role for Westminster in scrutinising what happens here at the Scottish Parliament, what the Scottish Government gets up to. When I spoke to Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, earlier, well, she scoffed at that idea. She said she wouldn't take any lessons on accountability from Mr Sunak, from a man who, in her view, has no democratic legitimacy. And as you've said, she is calling for another general election as soon as possible. At the heart of Ms Sturgeon's campaign, if it comes to it, against Mr Sunak will be Brexit and the economic damage that she says that has caused, and also the potential, she says, for another damaging wave of austerity. Conservatives in Scotland would retort by saying, look, the real threat to the Scottish economy is independence, but they know their authority to make that case has been weakened by what's happened with the party in recent weeks. The Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross, saying this has been a difficult and unsettling period for the party and the nation. And indeed, that is reflected in the polls. We're seeing something of a slump in Tory support, a move to Labour, no change really for the SNP away ahead, and on independence, still divided.
James, many thanks. James Cook there in Edinburgh. Let's go over to Belfast to Stormont and talk to Chris there. In terms of the political deadlock in Northern Ireland, Chris, do the prospects there change now that Mr Sunak is about to take office?
Well, Huw, as soon as Rishi Sunak takes over as the head of government in Westminster, he will have the task of trying to restore the devolved government here at Stormont. The Democratic Unionist Party says it'll continue to block the formation of a power-sharing coalition until the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK, known as the Northern Ireland Protocol, is scrapped. But there's no sign of that happening anytime soon. This Friday actually marks the legal deadline for a devolved government to be formed, following the election to the Northern Ireland Assembly back in May, when Sinn Féin beat the DUP to become the largest party for the first time. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has made clear that as things stand, he's planning to call another Stormont Assembly election, probably to be held on the 15th of September. Now, of course, there's the expectation of a cabinet reshuffle in the coming days. So people here are wondering if Chris Heaton-Harris might be replaced by someone who has different ideas. It's worth noting, though, that the junior minister in the Northern Ireland office, Steve Baker, said today that that plan to call a fresh election would remain regardless of what happens in London. This was one matter, he said, where there would not be a U-turn.
Chris, many thanks. We're going to go from Stormont to Cardiff Bay to the Senedd. And Hywel, given that we have a Labour government in power in Cardiff Bay, as you've been explaining to us over the months in terms of the difficult relationships with Westminster, is there any prospect that those are going to improve?
Yeah, Huw, you do wonder what the relationship will be between the latest Tory leader and the Labour First Minister here, Mark Drakeford. To be honest, I doubt it could get much worse than what we've seen for the last 3 years. For the last 7 weeks or so, we know that Liz Truss, as Prime Minister, hasn't even spoken to Mark Drakeford. So that enmity has been underlined today by Mark Drakeford's congratulatory tweet to Rishi Sunak, saying he hopes that they can work together in a way that his predecessors wouldn't allow. So will Rishi Sunak pick up the phone? Well, even if he does, I doubt that new relationship would stay friendly for long. When Rishi Sunak was here in Cardiff campaigning for the leadership, he made a point of attacking Labour's record on public services, particularly on education and on health, claiming that the Welsh NHS performance was worse than anywhere else in the UK. It's an attack line we've seen from previous Tory PMs going back to David Cameron. And if we edge towards an election, will we see that again? Also, expect plenty of tensions if, as most people expect, cuts come. The Welsh Government has already claimed that the UK Government's spending and cutbacks are to blame for curtailing its ambitions for what it can do in Wales. So, in an election, that argument can only increase.
Well, many thanks, Huw Griffith, there for us in Cardiff Bay. Now, Rishi Sunak's success in becoming party leader and Prime Minister is being seen by many, of course, as a highly significant moment in British politics, especially for the large community of British Asians. Mr Sunak, who was born in Southampton, is a practising Hindu of Indian descent. His grandparents migrated from East Africa back in the 1960s. Our Midlands correspondent, Navtej Johal, has been speaking to British Asians in Leicester about the significance of this moment.
2 years ago, this was then-Chancellor Rishi Sunak, a practising Hindu, lighting candles outside 11 Downing Street to mark the start of Diwali during lockdown. Tonight in Leicester, home to one of the biggest Diwali celebrations outside of India, large crowds of all backgrounds have been enjoying the festivities. The city has one of the UK's largest South Asian communities, and many feel this is a moment loaded with personal significance. How do you feel about Rishi Sunak? These young British Asian students from De Montfort University are of different faiths, but they agree on one thing. So who here thinks that Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister is a positive thing for ethnic minorities in the UK?
It's huge strides into creating a better society and creating a more balanced society even, in a generation where colour shouldn't even matter.
I'm not sure if it is a major step, as he's not been voted by the general public. I think if he was to then possibly call a general election and then stand, then maybe we get more of an idea of how it sits.
Rishi Sunak is from a higher socio-economic background than majority of BAME people in the UK. So does he actually represent those people financially? Does he represent them in terms of a socio-economic status? Not necessarily. It's only a matter of time.
The significance of today will be felt across the generations, including among those who knew a less diverse Britain. Lord Billamoria is the owner of a successful beer business and an independent life peer in the House of Lords.
I've seen in front of my own eyes this glass ceiling being well and truly shattered, with this country becoming a country of aspiration and opportunity for anyone regardless of race, religion or background. And here's the ultimate example.
Well, the Diwali celebrations are in full swing here in Leicester tonight. Despite recent issues, this city has been held up as an example of diversity in Britain, working pretty well over the years. But there are some concerns about the size of the challenges facing the Prime Minister and what tackling those may lead to.
British society has changed significantly, and there's a high degree of tolerance now, notwithstanding a significant minority of the population for whom there is a degree of resentment and opposition to this diversity.
Amid the pride felt by many South Asians in the city, there is also trepidation. The scale of the challenges faced by Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister leaves perhaps little time to truly savour this moment. Navtej Johal, BBC News, Leicester.
Well, as Navtej was saying there, Rishi Sunak's victory coming on the evening of one of the most important days in the Hindu calendar, the festival of Diwali, which is a national holiday in India. Our correspondent in Delhi, Rajini Vaidyanathan, joins us now. Tell us a little more about the response there, Rajini.
Well, Huw, there's a huge sense of pride here in India. One news network here saying that Rishi Sunak had given this entire nation a Diwali gift. It's also seen as significant here because of the history. It's 75 years since India gained independence after British rule. Another news channel was running these headlines today. They said the Indian sun rises over their empire and history has come full circle in Britain. Well, Rishi Sunak has deep ties with India. His grandparents were born in pre-partition Punjab and his wife is Indian. Her father is one of this country's best-known businessmen, the billionaire Narendra Modi. Well, tonight, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered his congratulations to Rishi Sunak. He said he looked forward to working closely with him. Now, you may remember earlier this year, Boris Johnson and Narendra Modi set a target of securing a free trade agreement between the UK and India of Diwali. That deal has yet to materialise. Many here are hoping that Rishi Sunak can help set that back on track.
OK, Rajini, thank you very much once again. Rajini Vaidyanathan there in Delhi. Well, the backdrop to much of the turmoil of recent months has been the sharp rise in the cost of living, especially in relation to fuel bills, and the mixed efforts of Conservative ministers to deal with all of that. Away from Westminster and the internal machinations of the Conservative Party, there are millions of voters with very real concerns about the months ahead and the prospect of higher interest rates adding to mortgage repayments. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has been speaking to people in Haywood and Middleton, a constituency in Greater Manchester, which turned from Labour to Conservative for the first time back in 2019.
How to fix British politics and restore order. Rishi Sunak is celebrating, but he'll need answers for people struggling in places like Haywood. Some will be harder to win over.
How do you both feel about the state of the nation right now?
That's the best.
Everyone here voted Tory in 2019.
I think it's right. You know, we voted for Boris Johnson and nobody asked us to vote him out and he should have still been in.
His own MPs told him to go.
So, you know, I mean, they're all backstabbers. Rishi Sunak is a backstabber.
Have a cup of coffee, please. Could Rishi Sunak get your vote?
I don't know. I don't think I'll be voting again after what happened to Boris Johnson. So.
Really?
Because my vote doesn't matter anymore.
Simon also opted for Boris Johnson in 2019.
Sum up how you feel right now.
Dismayed, disillusioned by the Tories.
Now, this is what he wants from Rishi Sunak.
A government we can trust, a government we can depend on, a government that's going to get things right and not going to screw us over.
But for many here, money is tight and life is tough.
It's okay, go on.
In a town promised levelling up and better times only 3 years ago.
I think it's beyond fixing, to be quite honest now. I have cancer. I'm on 4-week waiting lists to be seen, and it used to be 2 weeks when I first started, now it's 4 weeks. I have a child with special needs who had to go into a different town to go to school because there's no school facilities for her, etc. So it's just bad.
Austerity has already squeezed Northern England, and more could be on the way.
You have to find ways of coping, don't you? I mean, what else is there? But I don't know. I think there is a lot of people struggling. I think people have just lost faith now, haven't they?
Down the road in Middleton,
This is our food pantry.
the Lighthouse helps people in need.
It's a club, it's a membership club, so they join.
Every week, 80 families use this.
And for their £3.50 a week, they can get, on average, about £32.85 worth of food.
There's also emergency food parcels handed out. Today, it was Nadine and Faye who found themselves in crisis.
Just had nothing left.
In the cupboards?
Yeah, bare it was.
Rising bills meant they couldn't eat.
It's stress every day, isn't it? Where's your next meal going to come from and things like that? It's a silent war. We're basically in a silent war. And it's creating people of today to be angry at each other. The poor are like angry at the rich having what they have, and it's not that. It's just a vicious circle, isn't it? I feel scared of the world right now.
Soon, big political decisions will be made at a time when many need a helping hand. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Middleton.
Well, the time is 10:34 p.m. and this extended edition of BBC News at 10. We'll have more on the next Prime Minister later in the programme. Another main story tonight. The chief of Russia's foreign spy service has denied that Moscow has been provoking nuclear fears during its war with Ukraine. Sergei Narishkin, who's director of the SVR, that's the equivalent of Britain's MI6, went on to repeat an unsubstantiated claim that Ukraine could be planning to use its own so-called dirty bomb. That's a device that combines conventional explosives and radioactive materials. Mr. Narishkin was speaking to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
He's not only Russia's spy chief. Sergei Narishkin heads the Russian Historical Society too. And he's here to remember one of the most dramatic moments in history. When Khrushchev and Kennedy sparred in the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago, and the world came dangerously close to a nuclear apocalypse. A chance for me to ask about the Kremlin's current nuclear saber-rattling. Will you categorically rule out using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, I ask? He dodges the question, but points a finger back.
We are, of course, very concerned about Western rhetoric regarding the possible use of nuclear weapons. It is simply unacceptable. And yesterday, our defence minister telephoned his counterparts in Turkey, America and France and told them about the possible plans of Ukraine's leaders to use a so-called dirty nuclear bomb.
But there's no evidence of that, I say. And I'm asking about Russia's nuclear rhetoric. Do you admit it's been happening?
No, absolutely not.
The evidence suggests otherwise. Days before the Russian invasion, President Putin oversaw massive nuclear drills. And since then, several times, he's dropped unsubtle hints that he would be prepared to use a nuclear weapon in the Ukraine conflict. And what about Moscow's claim that Ukraine is about to explode a dirty bomb and then blame it on the Kremlin? Well, the British, American and French governments have issued a joint statement rejecting what they call Russia's transparently false allegations against Kiev, adding that the world would see through any attempt to use this allegation as a pretext for escalation. As for the Cuban Missile Crisis, Stas Namin's grandfather was the Soviet official who helped end the standoff. He fears nuclear rhetoric can lead to catastrophic mistakes.
I don't think it's a real danger that somebody will decide to push the button. But it's not the matter of decision of one person, it's a matter of even mistake. But the result will be the same.
Compromise diffused the missile crisis. So far, though, Vladimir Putin has shown little desire for that. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, let's have a little more then on the main story today. Rishi Sunak's victory as leader of the Conservative Party. We've already heard about the reaction in India. Let's hear now from our Europe editor, Katya Adler in Brussels. And first we'll go to North America editor Sarah Smith at the White House. Just, Sarah, a sense of what the Biden administration is making of all of this?
Well, in public, what the White House are saying are all the things that you would expect to hear from them, that the UK remains a strong ally and that our two countries have an enduring friendship that will never change, all that sort of thing. In fact, of course, they've got questions here about what a change of Prime Minister means for policy and for the relationship between the two countries. Joe Biden hasn't tried to call Rishi Sunak yet. Protocol dictates that he waits until an incoming Prime Minister has seen the monarch before offering his congratulations. And we do understand that he's planning to speak to Rishi Sunak in the coming days. When they do talk, top of the agenda will be Ukraine. What the White House most wants to know is that Rishi Sunak will continue to stand up to Russia and continue to help Ukraine with its defences. They believe they worked very well on this issue with both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and they will want to know that they can do the same with Rishi Sunak. On other issues, well, of course, Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak are not ideological soulmates in any way, a Conservative and a Democrat. But Presidents and UK Prime Ministers from opposite ends of the political spectrum have worked very well together in the past, but that depends on building a personal relationship, something which takes time. And the White House will want to know that Rishi Sunak is in number 10 to stay before they invest too much of the President's time in that.
Sarah, many thanks. Let's go from Washington to Brussels and talk to Katya. When we think about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, Katya, we think too, of course, about issues that are unresolved after Brexit. What does the European Union make of yet another Prime Minister to deal with?
Well, first of all, there's some raised eyebrows, caustic comments about losing count of the number of UK Prime Ministers this year. But of course, we do live in very serious times. And whoever's at the helm in the UK, Huw, EU leaders really want to work with us on three main areas. Again, like Sarah said, Ukraine, ongoing military support for Ukraine and continued Russia sanctions. Secondly, ensuring energy supplies and working together where possible to bring down those exorbitant prices. And thirdly, trying to work on the ongoing thorny issue of the Brexit agreement on Northern Ireland, known as the Protocol. Now, privately, EU leaders have breathed a sigh of relief that Boris Johnson hasn't returned to number 10. He's seen as divisive and unreliable here. Rishi Sunak is viewed as a pragmatist, a grown-up, in the words of one EU diplomat I spoke to this evening. He is known as a supporter of Brexit, but on the campaign trail this summer, he said it wasn't in the UK's interest to have a trade war with the EU. Now, that is thinking economically, but politically, considering how fractious the Conservative Party is, it may be very difficult for Rishi Sunak to be seen to making compromises with the EU. So in Brussels this evening, the thinking is that at best, EU business won't be a top priority for Rishi Sunak, but at worst, he could be tempted to court controversy, for example, over the Northern Ireland Protocol, to shore up political support in Eurosceptic quarters back home.
Katya, many thanks again. Katya Adler, our Europe editor there, and before that, Sarah Smith in Washington. Well, on taking over today, Rishi Sunak admitted that the UK faced, in his words, profound economic challenges. Indeed, the economic situation is significantly worse than it was when Liz Truss took office. Higher mortgage rates, energy bills, inflation, all combining to make it a really difficult winter for millions of households and businesses. We're going to look at the in-tray. We'll look at NHS and the immigration issues in just a moment. But before that, let's talk about the economic challenges, and let's join our economics editor, Faisal Islam, who's in the studio here with me to take us through some of the challenges that Rishi Sunak will have to be dealing with within hours. Faisal.
Yes, that's right, Huw. Rishi Sunak is going to be Prime Minister because of economic instability and a crisis partly the result of his predecessors' misjudgments in this area. He says there are, as you say, profound economic challenges. So let's have a look. Inflation, as you can see, already at 10%, a 40-year high. The energy guarantee limiting the rise this winter. But if that expires, inflation in the spring could still hit 11 or 12%, 5 or 6 times the target. Now, the economy itself is already falling and heading for a 1990-style recession, says the Bank of England. And the core of it all, energy prices, having gone up incredibly and current levels consistent with typical yearly household bills hitting over £4,000 without government support. Now, these prices have come down, which could be the luck the new Prime Minister needs, but this chart is the price for next winter. Now, the big picture, most of these challenges are now materially worse than at the start of the original leadership campaign. Some business leaders are generally concerned.
The first thing it needs to do is make it very clear that there's going to be less ideology and more of a focus on good government, some practical measures to reassure people. And I think in terms of major reassurance, rather than having rhetoric against our neighbours, actually start focusing on how we can rebuild bridges with our neighbours and get the economy going.
So here is the economic balancing act ahead of the debt plan that is still being prepared for 1 week today. We understand there's a gap that needs to be bridged of between 30 and 40 billion pounds to make up for the surviving mini-budget policies and an extra economic downturn effect. Cuts to spending could occur in welfare, big transport investments and in government departments too. But further tax rises, perhaps on wealthy pensioners, might be on the way. The new PM will see the 2019 manifesto as his mandate for being in office, but there is a big question as to how much priorities from 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, pre-inflation crisis, matter right now. All that is set against growing debts and possible recession, making this overall picture worse. And this has been the effective cost of borrowing for a 5-year loan to the government, known as a gilt. It raced up during the original contest and ballooned after the mini-budget, settled after the U-turns, and then actually today fell pretty sharply, almost the same as the morning of the mini-budget, as Mr Sunak's coronation became clear. Now, the Bank of England is watching very carefully.
Credibility is hard won and easily lost. What we've seen, though, when you look at yields in the gilt market, is that credibility is being recovered, at least on that benchmark measure. But I think that has to be followed through. A return to the kind of stability around policy making.
Now, on the currency markets, the value of the pound is still down noticeably too, while it has recovered from the extreme mini-budget record lows. Since Mr Sunak was last in government in July, the pound is down 6% versus the dollar and down over 2% versus the euro. So, big decisions for him. Will he change his mind from previous positions on national insurance and increasing benefits and tax credits by the current 10% rate of inflation? But before even that, will he continue with the debt plan 1 week from today? And will Jeremy Hunt remain Chancellor? Right now, they're keeping their counsel. Huw.
Faisal, many thanks once again. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor. The economic challenges being laid out there for us. There's added concern for the NHS and social care in England. That's also clearly in the inbox. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, of course, health is a matter there for the devolved governments. Officials are warning that this winter could see a so-called twindemic with both COVID and flu. And while all of this is happening, waiting lists, staff vacancies are at record levels. Our health editor, Huw has this assessment of the path ahead.
Winter's not fully set in, but the NHS is already under severe strain and facing its own state of emergency, a potential nightmare for the new Prime Minister. Hospital and ambulance delays in England will top the in-tray. Last month, 29% of patients in A&E had to wait more than 4 hours before being treated or assessed, a joint record high. A&E units are overcrowded because beds can't be found on the wards, and that's because it's a struggle to discharge patients who are medically fit back into the community.
The current situation is absolutely gridlocked, where people are stuck in many different places where they shouldn't be, not getting access to the care they need.
Social care is seen as a major cause of hospital delays. But why? Currently there are 165,000 staff vacancies in adult social care in England, and these shortages help explain why only 2 in 5 patients can leave hospital when they're ready to do so. Added to that, there's a lack of funding for residential and home care.
Local authorities tell us that they don't have the funding to make sure that the fees they pay the social care sector are sufficient for us to be able to employ and sustainably retain people.
The backlog of planned treatments and operations is clearly another challenge for Rishi Sunak. The waiting list in England is now 7 million, or more than 1 in 8 of the population. Mr Sunak said during the leadership campaign he wanted to set up a task force to speed up eliminating one-year waits and cutting the backlog. But that will be a big ask.
Once you've reached a number like 7 million, many people will have friends and family that they'll know sitting on waiting lists with very long waiting times, often that mean that people are suffering while waiting to get into the hospital. This is a huge issue.
Then there's the problem of NHS funding. The budget for England next year is £157 billion. That was announced last autumn when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, with him suggesting at the time it was generous.
But that budget was set when inflation was much lower. Now, like other organisations, the NHS is faced with escalating costs and continuing COVID-related spending like infection control.
Pay is hitting the headlines. Today the GMB union launched a ballot on strike action for ambulance staff, and nurses have already started voting on industrial action. Health is a devolved issue, so Mr Sunak won't be alone when it comes to solving pay disputes across the NHS in the UK's nations this winter. Huw Pym, BBC News.
The health element in the inbox there. Well, 6 years after the EU referendum and the Brexit pledges to take back control of Britain's borders, there are record numbers of people risking their lives to cross the English Channel in small boats. And the issue of immigration is far from settled. Now, the serious shortage of workers is prompting renewed debate about employing people from overseas. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been investigating.
The resort of Scarborough has enjoyed a bumper summer, with millions of visitors opting for a staycation in North Yorkshire. But many tourist businesses here are opening late and shutting early. Why? They simply can't get enough workers.
Got one mush of peas, please.
The Seafront Chippy's been operating on reduced hours all season, with half of its restaurant closed off to customers.
Cod chips and garden peas.
Perfect, thank you.
When I started 3 years ago, for instance, we were on eight members of staff. The best I've had this year so far is 3.
3?
3.
And that's really hitting your bottom line.
Yes, definitely. I mean, obviously, the sad thing is if there is people to be served, we don't have the people to serve them.
Scarborough voted decisively for Brexit and an end to free movement from the EU. But the new PM will know that since the referendum campaign, British attitudes to immigration have shifted significantly.
7 years ago, 2/3 of people told pollsters they wanted immigration to be cut. Now that figure has fallen to under a half. And at the same time, the proportion of people who say they want immigration actually to go up has risen from 7% to almost a quarter of British adults.
North Yorkshire has among the lowest unemployment rates in Britain. There simply aren't enough local people to fill available jobs, and we found very few who wanted to rule out using labour from overseas.
Thank you very much.
Like many hospitality businesses, this luxury hotel in the Dales has struggled to match people to vacancies. The owner, chairman of the local Tory Association, says it's better to recruit locally than buy in foreign staff.
What we have to do as a business is make sure we stand out in the marketplace as a good employer, somebody that it's really exciting and good and a future for people to come here and work.
Do you pay enough?
Do we pay enough? And again, it's a balance of paying the right amount. I think we pay the right amount.
This proud old Yorkshire pie company went bust earlier this month. The owners saying a key factor was a shortage of workers. More than 200 people have lost their jobs, sending a shudder through the county's manufacturing sector. Down the road at Heck, they can make 1 million sausages a day, but not without foreign labour. 2/3 of employees are from overseas, although the family-run business would love to attract more from Yorkshire.
We simply couldn't operate without foreign workers. Local people just aren't out there, unfortunately. A lot of young people in the area move to the big cities, go to university, expect to walk into a well-paid job at the end of it. But what we're saying is you can start from the production floor, learn about the business, learn about the supply chain, and you can make a good career of it.
There is an argument that Britain should wean itself off immigration as a route to economic growth. But pressure is building for the new PM to relax visa rules as the financial skies darken. Mark Easton, BBC News, North Yorkshire.
Last word tonight with our political editor, Chris Mason in Downing Street. Chris, when Mr Sunak talks about profound economic challenges, some of his opponents are saying already that what he means is there's another age of austerity coming up. Is that your understanding?
He faces some very, very difficult decisions very, very early on, and amongst those are likely to be significant questions about Whitehall budgets and squeezes on spending, such as the economic legacy that he inherits. So yes, this is a moment of personal political triumph for Rishi Sunak. In a postcode loaded with ambition, it is only a few who managed to get the privilege of walking through that door as Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak will manage it as the youngest Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool in 1812, the UK's 57th Prime Minister. But just as was the case with Liz Truss, there will be no honeymoon and instant tough decisions. An essential element of that, Huw, as you hint at, will be around spending. We've heard from the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, in the last couple of weeks about just how difficult the decisions he faces are. Whether it's him or a successor as Chancellor alongside the new Prime Minister will make those tough decisions very soon, perhaps as soon as next Monday, and they are likely to be painful politically for him, for plenty of people around the country too.
Chris, we'll talk again tomorrow, I know. Thanks very much. Chris Mason there, our political editor. The time is 5 to 11. Let's welcome Ben with the weather. Hi, Ben.
Hi there, Huw. Thank you. Good evening. One of the things you will notice most about the weather over the next few days is just how mild it's going to feel. In fact, it will feel warm at times, but with that, there'll still be some rain, and it's all because of this. This is the engine room driving our weather at the moment, this big area of low pressure churning to the west of the UK, and it is going to be sending some really warm air in our direction. See these orange shades surging northwards across the chart. Now, that said, it is going to turn a little bit cool for some overnight tonight. These are the starting temperatures tomorrow. That's because there'll be clear skies overhead, and that means some spells of sunshine during tomorrow. Some scattered showers, as you can see, but actually many places won't have many showers and will stay pretty much dry. But into the southwest corner, cloud and rain later in the day with a strengthening wind. But these temperatures, 13 for Stornoway, 18 for London, are a few degrees above where they should be at this time of year. But a wet evening tomorrow across southwest England, Wales. This heavy and perhaps thundery rain driving northwards across northern England into Northern Ireland and up across Scotland. It will be a wet start to Wednesday in the north of Scotland. Bands of showers following on behind through the day on Wednesday. Some of those heavy and thundery, but there'll be some spells of sunshine as well. It's going to be quite a blustery day for all of us, and particularly windy around some of these western coasts with gusts of around 40 to 50 miles per hour. But the winds coming from the south, bringing that warm air, 20 degrees, quite likely across eastern England. Temperatures could climb a little further than that into Thursday and Friday, possibly 21 or 22, but there will be some rain, particularly towards the north and the west of the UK. Huw.
Ben, thanks very much. Ben Rich with the weather there. That's BBC News at 10 on Monday, the 24th of October. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock with a BBC News special from Downing Street. But now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions standing by with the news where you are. But from all of us, thanks for watching and good night.